Hello and welcome everybody to the Housing Tips. It's the show where we talk about housing information, housing news, and everything in between. I'm your host, Eric, and today joining me once again is Jesse Mendoza. How are you today, Jesse?
Doing good, man. Doing good. How are you doing?
Doing well, can't complain. It's been extremely hot. I know we talk about this almost every single day of our podcast, but the heat is finally breaking. It was a nice 80-ish degrees outside. This morning was a little bit cold. I actually felt like I had to wear a jacket this morning, which was fantastic. So no complaints for me at all. I know that you had an exciting night last night. You were telling me before the show. Do you want to
Yeah.
go into it a little bit about, what you were doing and all that good stuff?
I think we were like celebrating that it finally cooled down. My uncle, he threw a birthday party for his daughter. And they had a grupo, they had a banda, and it was just like lots of family I hadn't seen in a long time. It was great. Lots of fun trying to muster through the morning today.
Oh, definitely. And the most important question, though, how was the food?
Food was delicious. Like they had a
Ooh.
huge platter of like mariscos and just like so much that you kind of get overwhelmed. You don't know what to get, but had a great time, man.
Awesome. That's great to hear. We always need to enjoy ourselves, and especially with good food, there's no complaints at all. I did want to make a hard subject change into the topic of our video today.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about three different ways on how to purchase a house, and I thought it would be fitting to come from the opposite side and actually talk about three ways to help sell your house in the current market. With only 3 months left, and we're almost done with September. We're halfway through September already. I think it'd be great to discuss and talk about with our viewers how to sell a house in this market when a lot of people are either trying to sell or trying to buy. But I think we can actually flip it today and talk about three tips on how to sell it. How does that sound today, Jesse?
Let's do it. Sounds good.
Awesome. So, as before, same as we did last week, I actually came up with one tip, but then Jesse actually came up with the other three tips. So, I'm going to talk about my tip. We'll go back and forth, and I'll let Jesse take the stage after that and go over his next two tips. How does that sound?
Let's do it.
So the first tip that I want to talk about is understand the current market. So the market is not like it was in 2021 for both sides. In 2021, 2020, during the pandemic, towards the end of the pandemic, when the interest rates were rock bottom, a lot of people, if you owned a house and you wanted to sell it, it was extremely easy to sell a house. All you had to pretty much do was just post it on Zillow and you would have lines going outside the door, down the street, looking for houses. However, that's not the market anymore right now. It's not the same market as it was before. And a lot of people, and I've definitely seen it, how it's changed more often, where in the past year or so, a lot of sellers have started seeing, I've started seeing a lot more sellers doing more to try to sell their house. As before, it was just posting and waiting for the piranhas to come and try to upbid a house. But what are your thoughts, Jesse, about the first tip is understanding the current market?
Yeah, that's a huge thing to pay attention to because sometimes we think about like past markets, right? Or sometimes we're kind of stuck or hoping, for it to be like the price point that we want. But we have to think about the rising interest rates, right? We have to think about buyer concerns about affordability. So you want to really price your home accurately in 2024. You want to be like cost conscious, right? You want to see that that's reducing like people's like purchasing power, right? If you price your home like too high, that could cause it to sit on the market. It could lead to like eventually like price reductions, and that can really like hurt its appeal. Like when people see like a bigger price reduction, so, like when you see a big price reduction, Eric, like what's maybe like some things that pop up like in your head?
No, definitely. That's actually a very interesting question you asked me. As a consumer, if I see a big price drop, two things
Yeah.
come up to me. One, maybe the seller is in peril. They're trying to get rid of the house as soon as
Okay.
possible. Maybe they already have a house lined up and they're just waiting for this final linchpin to go through. Sometimes what I think about too when I look at a house with a big price drop. If it's a small price drop, maybe a few thousand, I won't really think too much of it. But a big price drop is maybe there was another seller who asked to lower the price because they found something. Maybe they looked at the house and they said, hey, I had my inspector come out, and there's something wrong with the house. It needs a new roof. There's foundational issues. As someone who looked at a few houses and a few condos that had those issues, and looking at the prices that a new roof cost, a new foundation cost, that made me feel a little hesitant, especially seeing houses that are on the market for a long time and have significant price drops. Another thing that I also wanted to talk about too, that a point you brought up, is if a house is on the market too long, that's a major red flag to me, because especially in Southern California, if I see a house that's on the market for a few days and it has, tons and tons of views, and it already has a bunch of people sending offers, it goes off the market, then I know, okay, that was a really good deal. But if I see a house that's a little, it's been there for 60, 50, 70 days, the pictures aren't the best, or the pictures that, they look a little photoshopped. And something we talked about in our previous episode, which I'll link down below, is in a previous episode we talked about, sometimes you got to make the house look a lot nicer than it really is. And one of the things that I really think about is if it's on the market for a long time and it's sitting there and the price is reduced and it's there 50, 60 days, especially in Southern California, that raises some big red flags to me as well, where I feel like, I don't know if it's the deal, because if it was a deal, why is it still on the market? So those are my thoughts about it.
Yeah, like that red flag. And so as you want to think, the consumers, like what are they going to be thinking about, right? So we priced it wrong. We're not understanding the market, the current trends. They're thinking like, hey, like something's maybe like wrong with the house, right? Like something must be up. And I've had clients that send me properties and say, hey, like what's wrong with this one? As opposed to like, hey, I really like this one. They're like, what's wrong? And so already you're having consumers scrolling through and thinking something's wrong with your property, right? And usually then I'll dive in, do my research, like, hey, looks like doesn't have that value based on the condition, based on repairs it needs. If we were to make an offer, I don't think it might even appraise at that value. I feel a little bit kind of uncertain, but so all those factors are important. So you really want to study the market, and you want to see markets can change. So properties that sold comps within the past 3 months, comps 6 months, a year ago, very different market than today.
No, definitely. And that's actually something I just picked up right now with what you were talking about, is especially if a house goes off the market, if someone makes an offer, because on Zillow, and I'm sure the agents can tell through the MLS, is that if a house gets put on to a contract and then it falls out of contract. And sometimes it could be the buyer, they had issues funding the loan, or they couldn't come up with XYZ. But that's also a big red flag to me, is if a house is a really good price, but then it just drops off and then it comes back up right after, that's a major red flag to me,
Uh,
where I just think, oh well, like there must be something really wrong, exactly like you're saying. Maybe it didn't appreciate, maybe it didn't appraise for what it should be. And then the mortgage company looks at you and say, hey, you need to come up with an extra 50, 60 grand to get this deal to close. And then people, especially first time home buyers, they can't come up with just 60 grand in the next few weeks, and then sometimes they have to drop the whole contract and then restart from there. Those are my thoughts when I look at a property like that.
yeah, and there's some things that are out of your control, right? If that buyer inherently, doesn't like the property, finds something minor in the inspection, doesn't want to continue, like that's something out of your control. But yeah, if you're seeing it's coming like it's going pending and then back on the market, pending, back on the market, it raises that red flag, like, hey, like what's wrong? Or a lot of the buyers will think, hey, like something's up in the inspection. It's probably something big. I'll steer away. Let me look at something else. So,
Yeah.
you want to think of like all those pieces.
No, and actually, speaking of inspection, that's a fantastic transition into our second topic. Great work with the transitions today, Jesse. But number two, the second point that you wanted to bring up was light repairs and curb appeal. So that's something I'll let Jesse talk more into. But when first reading it, exactly like you said, having someone come out and look at it before you sell the house. But I'll let Jesse take the lead on that one. What are your thoughts about that, Jesse?
Yeah, that's my tip number two. You want to think about, what light repairs can I do? What appeal can I bring to my property? So planning a like pre-listing inspection with your realtor to identify any issues that could come up is key. What necessary repairs in advance do I need to do? And that makes it where you're planning up front, right? There's no surprises later down the line. It just streamlines the selling process, and so it can give those buyers peace of mind. Already planning, like, okay, going to work on this, let's repair that. And so that those are pieces that are going to get called out in the inspection. And if we have even those small funds set aside, it can make a big difference. And then first impressions, they really do matter. How can I invest a little bit in the landscaping? Even if it's planning to, water the grass a little bit more, even, planting like really affordable flowers on the side. How can I even repaint the exterior if needed, or even touch up certain areas if we don't want a high cost of painting? How can the entrance be inviting? You walk in, and I I recall people, like, when they walk in and like, oh, like, I like this one. And we haven't even gone inside and they're sold, like, hey, like, this is the one, right? And so when they when they get that good first impression, they're maybe going to be a little bit more flexible as they go throughout the property, right? So little upgrades, even if it's like new lighting, if it's, cleaning the driveway and pressure washing that, some fresh plants can really, really dramatically change that curb appeal. And
No,
then later on, you're able to work on, okay, how can I declutter? How can I depersonalize? Because you want them to envision, you know, your home to be their home. So if they see a lot of yours, that can be hard for them too.
no, definitely. And that's something I've even thought about as well, is like the millennial gray, where sometimes houses are made personalized, and they should be. A lot of people live there for years and years, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and so they make the home their own. But then yeah, like you said, sometimes it might be better just to make it look like an Airbnb, so that someone can walk in and they can
Yeah.
say, "Oh, this house could be my home." Especially as myself, when I went into this condo, I definitely looked around, and I actually, exactly like you said, before I even walked in, I actually fell in love with the idea of the house because it was painted a very modern color. The kitchen was done very modern. It was very, cute and nice, as my fiance says, versus some of the other condos I went into. It looks like a flip. It looks like they didn't care. It looks like they just pulled everything out of the walls and the flooring, and they're just like, it is what it is. But like you said, sometimes these people are selling their property for a good chunk of change. So, spending a few $1,000s to help make the place look nicer, and then leading itself into something a little bit more livable, something like I call millennial gray, which I love. I know that there's so many people out there that say, has no features, has no nothing. But as someone who grew up in a hoarder's household, having nothing and just nice, clean, and nice, easygoing house, oh, I love it. I love it so much. That's actually what sold me on this place. Is when I went in, it had staging furniture in here and everything, and it almost is still set up the same way that I bought it. Of course, I had some personal touches here and there, but when I first got it, I was definitely like, hey, where everything is situated, I think I could just continuously add to that versus restarting ever. But I'm very surprised that even as something is just decluttering, a lot of people just throw everything in their backyard or they throw everything in their garage. But then if you could, have an empty garage, I've been to properties where I look at them and I see an empty garage and I say, oh, I could have a project car here. I could have a workbench here. But if you walk in and there's just a bunch of clutter and it's just full, it makes the garages feel a lot smaller. And then in your head, you're like, could I even fit two cars into here? Could I even do anything? But all of those things definitely add up, especially for the price that you're putting the house for. And that's actually something I wanted to transition into our third topic and our final topic, is the idea of offering incentives to buyers. So, with offering incentives to buyers, since you're selling your property for such a high price, I definitely feel that spending a little bit of extra money to entice the pot, maybe, adding a little bit here and there. I'll definitely let Jesse talk about this, but I can 100% agree with that idea that offering incentives to the buyers to help get the deal across the finish line.
Yeah. Tip number three, offer incentive to buyers. You want to consider offering, you know, to make your property more attractive, right? And so attractive with the staging and the appearance, but then also attractive to, the buyer and their commitment and how can your property be more attractive to them. So am I going to cover a portion of the closing costs, right? Am I going to be willing to offer a home warranty? Am I going to be flexible with the closing date? Maybe someone is trying to sell their property and get into your property. It might be contingent on theirs closing. Maybe you're flexible with that too and saying, hey, okay, like I'll have patience in order for them to kind of close. I'll still, have my safeguards and work with my realtor. And that can be a huge thing too, where it makes it marketable, right? These perks can help, that financial burden, like for buyers, even if it's like including furniture. I was on the other end, helping sell property, and a buyer was so excited. At the end of the day, they kind of just needed to get rid of furniture. There was a nice like outdoor patio set, and it was like, hey, like, are they would they be interested? They were like ecstatic, like, yeah, like that's an awesome like patio set. It looked like brand new with the outdoor fire pit, and so they already were going into it feeling so comfortable and feeling like, hey, like this is my home. So even if it's repair credits, even if it's flexible closing dates, trying to think of like how can I structure it and market it so people can be like, hey, like they're offering this, they're offering that, compared to the other one, they're a little bit more firm. Let's offer on this property.
No, 100%. And that's actually so funny you brought up. Every single point that you brought up, I actually experienced it when I bought this condo.
Nice.
Starting with the first one with the home warranty. I actually got a home warranty when I purchased this house. And that's something we'll talk about in later episodes. Are home warranties worth it? Are they kind of scammy? What's the good, what's the bad with those? We'll talk about that in a future episode. But especially for myself, being a first time home buyer, especially with my fiance, we didn't know anything about fixing up a property. We didn't know anything about what could go wrong, what could break, and having that extra layer of security, having that little bit of extra layer of, like, warranty and safety definitely made me feel very comfortable, buying the property. And just like you said with the furniture, as someone who's had to buy a lot of furniture to furnish this condo, and of course you yourself, Jesse, buying furniture for your place, furniture is extremely heavy. And nobody wants to, especially if you live there for, like we talked about, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you buy a lot of stuff over that time span, and having to move it out might cost more money than just to say, hey, you can have it. And but then the seller feels that, hey, I'm getting rid of all this stuff, but then the buyer's like, oh my gosh, like you said, we have ourselves a patio already, we already have ourselves a fire pit, we already have ourselves cushions, and we already have friends coming over, and it's a win-win for both sides. That I think is something that a lot of people don't envision or don't think about when they're making their property more sellable, more approachable. But I am 100% in agreement that, hey, sometimes just like that little bit of extra, that cherry on top, that whipped cream on top, those sprinkles on top could definitely make a property much more appealing to sell and gets it through the finish line. And I 100% agree with everything that you said, Jesse. But I also wanted to wrap up this video, and I wanted to give a minute to Jesse. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Jesse, about tips on how to sell a house, especially as our last week we talked about how to purchase a house? So any closing thoughts, final ideas that you want to talk about before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, no, I think like those are the main key, tips for one to kind of look at, and if you're having any thoughts of, putting your property for sale, reach out. I can definitely go over and send you guys over like my guide and other tips that I have when I go over during my listing presentation. So I'll definitely feel free to kind of share that to anyone interested.
No, awesome. That is fantastic to hear. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. I feel like I tell you this every single week, but thank you so much for your time. And listeners, if any of this information sounded great to you, sounded like something you want to learn more about, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this video. And besides that, thank you so much, Jesse, for the time. I'm Eric, and this is Jesse from the Housing Tips. And thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.